This podcast is dedicated to the memory of Danny CASOLARO. He said when going down to the Martinsburg that he was going to be meeting his source and he was going to bring back the head of the octopus. This podcast is based on 21 years of research since the day that I contacted William Hamilton, the president of Inslaw Inc., for the first time in January 2000 during my establishment of a federal parliamentary committee of privileges inquiry into the threats against myself in my career as a federal advisor to the federal government and state government by a company owned by Rupert Murdoch that sold the lean software to the Australian government, known as the Enhanced Promis software by CIA to spy on the Australian government. Danny CASOLARO was found with both of his wrists completely slashed, 11 slashes on one side, and then we're led to believe that he then leant across and slashed the other wrist and committed suicide. His briefcase, bag and 2 envelopes containing all of his documentary evidence investigating Promis software, BCCI payments for the Iran-Contra scandal, and all his evidence leading to Dr. Earl Bryan and the theft of the Promis software was missing. As I say, over 21 years I'm a physicist, but when you collapse down the probability function in 3 dimensions, then it was only through quantum physics from famous physicists Niels Bohr, Max Planck, Richard Feynman that we're able to visualize what nature looks like as small particles or as photons of light, when we can see them, when we cannot see them, because their behavior changes whenever you're observing it. And this is the same principles that apply to the octopus. It's taken 21 years of historical research based on fact, legal evidence, documents of governments, corporations, bank transactions to follow the money, to reveal the octopus. I'm a physicist. I've served with distinction as the former science advisor to the Australian Federal Liberal Party. And as I said, I was a witness in an Australian Federal Committee of Privileges that was investigating evidence that my companies had been destroyed, selling encryption technologies, and also my career as a trusted advisor had been destroyed by a company owned by Rupert Murdoch that sold the Promis software to the Australian government. Also, all my business ventures with United Nations SEAL program, endorsed by the Australian federal government, were destroyed by CIA Operation Steel Point. Previous podcasts have actually detailed everything that's real on that and documentary evidence. This is now focusing on the Promis software affair as it relates to William Hamilton's company, Inslaw Inc., and also the testimonies given by Michael Riconosciuto, recorded in the US courts in 1991, and also all of his letters, communications with myself over 21 years. So I dedicate this summary of research to also William Hamilton and also to Michael Riconosciuto. In 2004, there were 2 documentaries about my companies and credibility with governments and with encryption technology to build a business of trust. It was destroyed, just like Bill Hamilton's Inslaw company. It was highly trusted. He was patriotic to America. I was patriotic to Australia. And by chance, my business partners, KPMG, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics, were also the business partners of Bill Hamilton's Inslaw company. And what this will show you is that I used to work for a company owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also was a distributor of Bill Hamilton's software in Australia, and abandoned him, claiming they never sold a copy, and yet this is the evidence of what they did. I'm going to summarise that all my evidence shows that Roger Allen, chairman of Computer Power Group, Ted Prince, the president of Computer Power Group USA, and Rupert Murdoch, who owned 50% of Computer Power Group, had a common director in 1982, and it was Stanley Schumann, who was the managing director of Allen and Company. He was also an investor and supporter of Earl Bryan's companies, Hadron Inc., Simcom Inc., Financial News Network, Info Technology, and also United Press International, UPI. So we have two media barons that are bankrolled by Stanley Schumann, Allen & Co. Common, follow the money. Next, I'm going to show you that Roger Allen, Ted Prince with Computer Power, and Rupert Murdoch had a joint ventures established in 1982 with Wang Labs, with the founder Anne Wang, and the key R&D director and software developer for the whole of Australia with the Australian government, and also with CIA, Charlie Cross. And I'm going to show you that all of them had contracts with CIA, DIA, NSA going back to 1982. It actually was earlier than that, but I'm focusing on the records that I've recovered that are official memos and correspondence within CIA for the development of CIA, DIA, NSA's SAFE software, which is for the management and file system for all records of intelligence across all agencies, NSA, CIA, DIA, and the Secretary of State Department. And also the SAFE SWIFT banking software that penetrated all of the banks so that they could actually intercept all transactions, monitor it, track it worldwide, but also move covert funds for CIA worldwide through all the banks without detection. And so it was the fox looking after the chicken coop. They installed all their software at FinCEN, and they installed all their software at Austrac in Australia. The pictures you see, the companies you see, are all working together since 1982, and we'll tell the story now of how Bill Hamilton's software was exploited worldwide, and my story and evidence now confirms the evidence of Michael Riconosciuto independently is valid and substantiated by myself. In previous podcasts, I've already described how a bogus prince came to Australia with a promise on national TV, televised in Australia and worldwide, to make $1 billion to a United Nations SEAL program that destroyed my company and United Nations SEAL program with the federal government of Australia. I will prove to you that these people were involved with that. Also, Privileges Committee, which I'm talking about, I'm actually in the middle of that when I do an analysis of which company is possible to do the Promis at the request of a journalist by the name of Marshall Wilson, who's been covering Wackenhut, Hadron, donations and story, interviewed Ari Ben-Menashe when he came to Australia, and he said the story of Promis is so complicated, I don't understand how it can actually spy on governments. And my expertise in physics, maths and computing at a very high level, I was able to do a technical analysis, and I found there was only one company that could do this in Australia and the US that I know of, who has expertise in writing COBOL compilers, is a systems integrator, and more importantly, artificial intelligence to make a smart Promis software. And so I picked up the telephone and called Bill Hamilton, first time, January 2000. I had then launched a federal police investigation into fraud being committed by the Johns Hopkins institutions against my company from 2003 to 2004, and during that I was introduced by Bill Hamilton to get in contact with Michael Riconosciuto, and I spoke to Michael for the first time by letters, and he was so relieved to have someone that had expertise in physics, mathematics and computing just like himself, that he could actually explain what he did with the modifications and how it works for Echelon. Next, during the middle of this, while I'm talking to Mike Riconosciuto, I have former President of United States, Honourable Gerald Ford, offer to negotiate a $100 million settlement for me with Johns Hopkins. And I have a podcast that I'm doing to show why he appeared. Then I have 2 TV programs launched on the same night about the fraud committed by Johns Hopkins against my companies to kill off my encryption companies. I have a whole podcast on how that worked. And then Robert Booth Nichols appears and makes threats against my life. In December, he contacts this TV program the night that they air all the evidence of the fraud involving Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, who was my partner, and it turns out that it's Robert Booth Nichols threatening me that I'm upsetting very powerful Israeli businessmen, that I am going to get a crowbar to the back of the head, I'm going to have the military coming down, but he also mentioned something, 2 names that were not on the TV documentary, and they had worked for Rupert Murdoch's company, Computer Power Group. That told me the link. It was Promis. Later on, Bill Hamilton lets me know, early February 2005, that our Promis research is actually upsetting the neocons, headed by Paul Wolfowitz. 2 months later, George Bush Jr. appoints Paul Wolfowitz as the new president of the World Bank. I have a podcast on how important that is. And then later on, I discovered that the bogus prints that appeared was actually part of a complete money laundering operation of hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of gold bullion, US security notes, and the ruples to collapse by Leon Wanta as part of CIA Operation Still Point. I have a whole podcast on definitive legal evidence of this. And then the last part here is that it's very important. It turns out that Leon Wanta was using CIA Operation Still Point with the Promis software to stabilize the Kuwait dinar. And it turns out at the end here, I discovered that the ambassador letter thanking him for doing that and using the Promis software owns a company with George Bush Sr., his wife, and Neil Bush, and also 2 Russian mafia billionaires. Now the chance of that happening, as I said, is you cannot throw a dice. I'm a physicist, I've written software to work out probabilities in 3 dimensions, just so that you know where you can see an electron in an atom in a particular shell. You cannot line all these ducks up, throw a dice and say it's just by chance. So watch this story and you will see that Danny CASOLARO was going to reveal the head of the octopus. So the story is The Theft of Inslaw's Promis Software by Dr. Earl W. Bryan, working with CIA and NSA for 2 purposes. 1, management system for tracking Soviet nuclear submarines installed onto the US Trident submarine. Previous podcast proves that that was done by Earl Bryan's company's Hadron and my partner and Bill Hamilton's partner, the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, including the senior leading architect for NSA that developed Echelon. Previous podcast details all the legal evidence on that. But the most important thing is, during Bill Hamilton's battle with the theft of the software involving Department of Justice, CIA, and the cover-up, it turns out Michael Riconosciuto gives an affidavit that he was contracted to make the modifications for CIA and Earl Bryan at the Wackenhut Cabazon R&D Centre. I serve with distinction as a trusted science policy advisor, nationally selected on merit, and I uncovered and shut down, responsible for shutting down, billions of dollars of R&D syndication tax frauds. My success was on the front pages of the newspapers in 1995 and recorded in the Federal Parliament and Senate Hansards. The minutes and letters of the Federal Industry Research and Development Board, the chairman of the IR&D Tax Concession Committee wrote 2 letters in 93-94 to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology, identifying that a company owned by Rupert Murdoch was considered the worst offender rorting the syndication R&D program. I was threatened because of my detailed knowledge of how they were doing it, and it involved Bankers Trust. Very important to know that. Bankers Trust / Deutsche Bank goes back to John Hopkins' board of directors. One of the directors I was having legal action against with my solicitors and also a federal police was A.B. Krongard, who became the executive director of CIA. So, let's begin the story with Bill Hamilton. January 2000, in the middle of my investigation of threats being made by Rupert Murdoch's company, Computer Power Group, I call him for the first time, introduce and ask him, do you know an Australian company called Computer Power Group? It's just a simple question. I had identified they developed the COBOL compiler. They are the biggest supporter of DEC-VAX in Australia and US, and also artificial intelligence. They're the only company that could have allowed for the Promis software to be installed with the intelligence agency. And his response was shock. Yes, in 1982 I was approached by Roger Allen and Ted Prince at a hotel in Boston, and they wanted to be appointed as the distributor of Inslaw's Promis software for the markets of Australia and Asia. He proceeded to do that, but he says Bill says they abandoned Inslaw in 1984, claiming they were never able to sell a copy of the Promis software. I told him that's not true, that I can prove it. I used to work for them. I know what they do. And right now, I have launched a federal parliamentary inquiry into the evidence of all the threats they've been making, where they vowed to destroy me because of my detailed knowledge of how they were rorting the R&D syndication program in Australia. On June 2004, I made first contact with Michael Riconosciuto, and he said in letters to me, the first application, the original client was NATO and US Navy for the modified Promis software for tracking Soviet nuclear submarines. It was integrated into the missile fire control and command systems of the US Trident submarines using VAX 11780 computers. My background is in mainframe and supercomputers, advanced programming, image processing, signal processing, and advanced physics. Michael was relieved. He didn't have to explain the technology for the first time. I invite you to go back and watch my complete podcast that proves that that was true, and it was Hadron and the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory that developed the missile fire control command systems on the VAX 11-780 and it was installed with the US Trident submarines, not the VAX 11-780, but a different version of it with a solid state disk. But the most important thing is it's definitive evidence, and it was a contract done under the supervision of the architect of Echelon 2 for NSA, CSS. Then Michael says the second application, the modified Promis software, was for Swift banking. It was installed at Transaction Technologies Inc., a subsidiary of Citibank. That got my attention because I've got Gerald Ford turning up and he's on the board of Citibank negotiating $100 million for me. And he says that Dr. Earl Bryan, the chairman of Hadron, was using it with CIA to move covert funds through the international automatic clearing houses. Michael also tells me the modified Promis software was renamed the Lean software, and it was sold to the Australian government. He also mentions that the CIA's Promis software was also modified to make use of the architecture of the Intergraph VAX computers, especially for Echelon. The only person that ever knew, Michael cannot know this, no one knows it. There's no one else in Australia that would know it other than myself because of things that I worked for them, but more important, I knew about what they were doing in the government. It was Computer Power Group, Rupert Murdoch's company, that sold the Lean software to the Australian government. And it triggered a full federal parliamentary inquiry because it had illegally breached all the federal privacy and confidentiality legislation by integrating all databases across governments, defence, intelligence, law enforcement, banks, social security, health. It was the biggest scandal in 1992. Michael's in prison and being convicted. This inquiry is going behind the scenes. I contacted the members of the committee, interviewed them, and they told me, when I told them, did you know that there's a testimony of Michael Riconosciuto in a US court confirming that he modified it for eavesdropping on the Australian government, and it was the Promis software renamed Lean. The members were in shock. I said, were you ever advised by Australian intelligence or Australian Federal Police that there's evidence in a court confirming that the Lean software is modified for CIA and NSA to spy on the Australian government? And they said, had we been told, the alarm bells would have been ringing. The answer is no. We were never told. I said, how can that be? It's in the courts. It's in official documents, and there's media talking about a current affair program where Michael Riconosciuto appears with Bill Hamilton saying that it had been sold to ASIO and the Australian government. So we've now, moving forward, focusing on when I contact Bill Hamilton. Bill knew Computer Power Group. He had met Roger Allen and Ted Prince at a hotel in Boston, introduced to him by IBM, his partner, to become the distributor of the software. That's all he knew. He didn't know that Computer Power Group was owned by Rupert Murdoch. I did. I had all their annual reports. I worked for them. And it was me that was exposing the R&D syndication roots involving Computer Power Group with Bankers Trust, Deutsche Bank, in major R&D syndication fraud roots that led to the shutdown of the whole program, and I was personally thanked by the Federal Treasurer of Australia for doing it and exposing it by Honourable Peter Costello. Computer Power Group. Roger Allen. He's the chairman of Allen and Buckridge. This is his journey after becoming the distributor of the Promis software. He then becomes the founder of Authentic A, sold to Active Card Corp, who appoints the former Deputy Director of CIA and the former Deputy Director of NSA, both in office when Danny CASOLARO is investigating the theft of Inslaw's Promis and the Promis software. He was the founder of Computer Power Group, owned by Rupert Murdoch. He had a 50-50 relationship in 50% equity in Computer Power Group with Rupert Murdoch. He was also the Deputy Chairman of Austrade for Australia, 1990 through to 1997. And his major clients, because I've got all his annual reports, when I worked for him, his major clients were the US Secretary of State, Alexander Haig and James Baker. The US Secretary of Treasury, James Baker. He developed his retrieval software, which I will demonstrate to you. His major client was the US Department of Defense. He sold the StratPlan, Wang Labs Computer Associates software with Model, using Model 204 database software and an artificial intelligence with Wang Labs, the biggest contract in 1982. He was negotiating that contract a year before he goes to Boston to see if he can become the exclusive distributor of Inslaw's Promis software. He's done the proposal. He wins the contract. It's the biggest contract, and then he gets almost $1 billion contract to automate the whole tax office and federal parliament for all the records of legislation of members of parliament and Senate, communications, emails, everything. And that's what Hadron did. Hadron had the exclusivity for and computer systems, management systems for all senators and Congress members in White House. Here's a common theme. A media baron, Earl Bryan, a media baron, Rupert Murdoch, are automating all the government, members of parliament, Congress, and senators in both Australia and USA, and developing all the intelligence software and banking software, which I'll prove to you. So he sold the lean software to the Australian government. He did his complete trial in 1987 to 1990 with the Federal Attorney General and Austrac, equivalent to FinCEN. Michael Riconosciuto warned Danny CASOLARO not to use FinCEN when he's doing the searches with IRS. It's Promis. That was with Earl Bryan. On the Australian side, Roger Allen is developing the lean software, and it's developed and installed at Austrac. Both of them are for following money laundering transactions with all banks. This is the fox. It's done with CIA and NSA and DIA. It's the fox looking after the chicken coop. All law enforcement is using and intelligence is using their software, which is designed for special purposes of echelon, for economic espionage. And as I said, he was the distributor of Promis software. 1982, 1984, dumped Inslaw Inc., claimed that unable to sell one copy. Well, let me show you that that wasn't true. These are the cards of all of his subsidiaries and companies that he established worldwide with Rupert Murdoch. CP Software, CP International are the key ones for the software contracts with governments in the USA and also with defence worldwide. So, after Bill tells me that, I thought I'd go and do a check on Promis. I do a search. He said it was installed originally with Computer Power Group with IBM. They'd set it up with the Northern Territory government. Now, I have been to Northern Territory government representing Computer Power Group. I was invited to meet with the Senator John Stone, and also with recommendation for telemedicine and medical service for exports to Asia. I was the guest speaker, did a presentation. But Northern Territory, why would they be taking Promis software to Northern Territory? It's the smallest state, well, territory. It's predominantly an Aboriginal community, a very, very small population. Why aren't they doing it in Melbourne, Victoria? Why aren't they doing it in Sydney, New South Wales, Canberra? Why such a small community for a sophisticated package called Promis? And the reason being is it wasn't really being used for that at all. It's being modified for Pine Gap, for Echelon. And I'll prove it to you. So, here's the evidence. Questions raised in the House following the TV program, Current Affairs, that interviewed Bill Hamilton and also Michael Riconosciuto about the theft of the Promis software and being sold to the Australian government and ASIO. And there's the response coming back from the minister. It says he wanted to know if it was a spying software to invade and do surveillance on the citizens of Northern Territory, and what was the purposes of it, and where did it come from, and is it the stolen version? And a response is given back. Yes, we saw the program, Current Affair. I have a podcast that I will have for you to show segments of that. That will be separate from this one so that people can get some education on it. And it says that, talks about that the Promis software was purchased by the Northern Territory. And it's been used in Northern Territory with police, courts, correctional services, store files, processing of cases of accused persons through the courts. Now, also in there, you have to understand that Bill's partners were IBM, and Computer Power Group was introduced to Bill by IBM to become the distributor of his Promis software. So they owned what was called the Francis Bay Computer Corporation in Northern Territory, which is a free trade zone. Development for software, they get huge tax write-offs, and it's sort of it's like a tax-free haven for the purposes of building an IT industry in Northern Territory, which is one of our smallest territories and states. It's not a state, but it's a territory, to create employment, but it's also an opportunity for opening the doors for Indonesia, Taiwan and China, because Computer Power Group has expertise in translation of Chinese language, which is one of the things that Echelon wants to do with the Promis software. So, partners of Bill, Computer Power Group and IBM. Let's continue. It actually shows that they're working with the Taiwanese government and they're building a land information system database. Now, the first application, Bill says, when he exported the Insular software, went to Ireland and it was put in for land information system. Now, Bill has given a license for the Promis software for Northern Territory Police and Justice, Department of Justice. But it's quite clear that Bill's partners who know the benefits for land information and databases is that they're trying to integrate all records of titles of land together with bank accounts with artificial intelligence so that you can identify people that want to be anonymous and are money laundering. So Computer Power Group is developing a land information system and an integrated justice information system, and at the same time has received the tapes of the COBOL software for Promis. So they've got their hands on the COBOL tapes. Just like Michael said, were delivered to him by Peter Wiednix from Customs for him to modify. So Computer Power Group, by getting itself appointed, it was a scam. Earl Bryan had been trying to acquire Insular Inc. with Hadron Inc. and also with another company that he was working with, specialising in law and enforcement with Paul Wormley, Simcom Inc. The names Hadron Inc. and Simcom Inc. were working with CIA, developing all of their safe software with Wang Labs and Computer Power Group. So when that bid failed, Computer Power Group suddenly and mysteriously appears and gets their hands on the tapes. In 1982, Computer Power Group was also developing a fully integrated Northern Territory Police Fire and Emergency Services database on a VAX computer. See, Computer Power Group, whilst being a partner of IBM, was the sole representative for the biggest integration projects with governments, intelligence, law enforcement in Australia on the VAX computers. Here is the evidence of the Northern Territory Correction Services. They're not talking. They've got two systems. Computer Power says that it's developed its own integrated justice information system together with the Northern Territory Police using the Promis software sold by Inslaw. Computer Power Group's across it, all of that. Integrated Justice Information System. Why does that name ring a bell with me? Because Paul Wormley, who worked for Hadron Inc. and owned Simcom Inc., was developing all of the software for SAFE for the Department of State, Secretary of State, and CIA SAFE software with Hadron Inc., founded the Integrated Justice Information Systems Institute. So the name Integrated Justice Information Systems, IGIS, is actually similar to Paul Wormley. I haven't put into this podcast, but Paul Wormley company sold not the Lean software, but the Leap software to the Victorian government that was integrated with Intergraph. And that's very important because that's a scandal in itself, and I'm going to expose that one in a separate podcast. So now we've got evidence. Paul Wormley, Simcom Inc., Hadron Inc. are selling a police system, law system called the Leap software to the Victorian Police, where Computer Power Group is, and it's integrated with Intergraph, the computer system designed for special purposes for CIA, as Michael has testified. When I followed the Promis software, I also found, wait a minute, the Federal Police have got Promis software too. This is very confusing. How do you get Promis software with police in Northern Territory, and then there's a claim that Promis software is in Federal Police? Now, Computer Power Group has contracts with the Federal Police for all their software, plus the Northern Territory Police. It developed both. But I found the paperless office, which is office automation, which is where it talks about Promis. They use the acronym Police Real-Time Online Management and Investigation System. Now, given that Current Affairs is exposing that the Promis software was sold to ASIO, why would the Australian Federal Police decide to call theirs Promis? And it turned out the reason being is it was designed by a police officer who set up the Information Services Unit in Northern Territory for 10 years using Inslaw's Promis software with Computer Power Group before going off to develop the Promis software for the Federal Police. It was integrated with Intergraph's computer dispatch systems and GIS. Bill Hamilton also received a telephone call from a Mr. Nick Rose from ASIO. ACES. ACES is different than ASIO, but he says that he knows for a fact that Inslaw's software, Promis bootleg, was sold by CIA to ASIO, and it was being integrated with graphical information systems for applications in Indonesia. I'll do a separate podcast on that. He said it's called OASIS. OASYS. I have all the Federal Police and ASIO annual reports confirming that that's true. And surprise, surprise, you're going to find that Computer Power Group is involved with that because it was on VAX clusters for ASIO. And they also had Wang Labs, Alliance Computer Systems, and the only person that can do that is Computer Power and Wang Labs. So there you go. It turns out that integration with Intergraph was taking place in Northern Territory, but I found that the person that is joining the Australian Federal Police to head up and be involved with the Promis software for the Federal Police had come from Northern Territory Police in Darwin, and had set up the Information Services Unit and then became the AFP as a technical specialist for their Promis software. So here's the trail. It goes back to Bill's Promis software tapes being accessible to Computer Power Group with Northern Territory Police and Department of Justice. I'm going to do a separate podcast on this because Rupert Murdoch's company, Computer Power Group, who was threatening me, on their board of their research labs in Victoria was the woman who was the key person who awarded the Intergraph contracts in Victoria, which triggered a full royal commission in its own right. She's sitting on the board, and she was a director of a Victorian Government of Health, and was involved in the threats that were made against me that were now subject. All my evidence was provided. My lawyers found her. How could she be a director of a government and concurrently a director of a private research group with Computer Power Group and IBM and Intergraph? And then I did my research in the Royal Commission. She came from American Satellite Company, whose owner had arranged for Michael Riconosciuto to be employed by Wackenhut. Now, is that a chance? Given the testimony and letters that I have from ASIS, someone working within ASIS, knowing that CIA's software, Inslaw software, bootleg was sold to ASIO, and they're embarrassed. And it's been integrated with graphical information systems, which is with Intergraph, with Promis, for applications in Indonesia. You can't make this up. And so his job is linking it to Intergraph in Darwin. And that's exactly what ASIO was needing it for applications in monitoring of land titles and also telephone calls, interception with Echelon, particularly East Timor. And that was what the application was, with the Indonesian and also East Timor crisis and peace forces being sent in afterwards. Now this part's the key to it. StratPlan software. This is the genesis of the relationship that comes to Wang Labs, Computer Corporation of America, Model 204. Computer Power is the exclusive distributor of Model 204 and has a joint venture with Wang Labs established back in 1982, whilst approaching Bill to get their hands on the Promis COBOL software tapes like Michael needed for modifying. I'm going to prove to you in this journey that Wang Labs, Computer Power and Hadron Inc. and Simcon Inc. were already working with CIA, ASIO, intelligence, developing all their software for VAX computers, IBM computers and also Wang computers from day one. So StratPlan is the genesis of the biggest contract awarded to Wang Labs outside the USA. It is massive. It involves US defense contractor TRW, which is the contractor responsible for Pine Gap, Echelon in Australia. You may not know this, but it turns out that Christopher Boyce, in the Falcon and the Snowman movie story, confirms he was working for TRW when he saw all the intercepts of what the US government, NSA and CIA were doing to the Australian government. TRW, Echelon, NSA, CIA. Relationship from day one. Now, it's the biggest fraud detection computer database being built in Australia using the Promis software. Here's the media release, 83. Wang Lab, 63 million contract. Communications Department of Social Security. It's been built. $100 million contract for the biggest communications network across Australia. All government departments are going to be integrated, and agencies. It was put onto Amdel computers, storage technology, because it's doing a collection of scanned documents, office automation, old records, plus new records, which are going to be electronic. But it's got to be managed in a very, very powerful computer database. And there you go, Computer Power Group is the winner to develop the database using Model 204. And the opportunity that Hadron needed and Inslaw needed, the Promis software, was that its ability to integrate multi-vendor computers and databases seamlessly. That's what the advantage was for Inslaw's Promis software. And Computer Power Group has the tapes, and they claim they never ever were able to sell a copy, but they won the biggest contract to do the database design for the biggest contract with Wang Labs that has partnerships with Hadron, Simcon Inc. and Computer Power Group to develop CIA software. So, emerges Dr. Prince, Ted Prince, the gentleman who meets Bill Hamilton with Roger Allen at a hotel in Boston in 1982-83 to become the distributor of Inslaw's Promis software. Well, he's the secretary to the Department of Social Security, and he's responsible for this big awarding of the contract to Computer Power and Wang Labs. And he gets appointed to become the president for Computer Power Group in their partnership with Wang Labs. So the strat plan, records confirm categorically it's going to replace all current tape batch computer systems with an online database, an intelligent database by using artificial intelligence to link records to identify linkages of people, identify them. Massive installations of Amdel mainframe computers, storage tech, and Wang Alliance terminals going everywhere. Now, Wang Alliance terminals are all throughout the US State Department, all through White House, all through CIA, all through Customs, all through the embassies worldwide to hook into CIA's safe software and databases for the integration of all intelligence databases across of all agencies, CIA, NSA, and DIA, and Justice, with FBI and Customs. The strat plan was approved in Cabinet in May 1983, but it was set up and negotiated with Computer Power Group and Wang Labs and planned a year and a half before. So before even Bill is approached to get the Promis software, they're already planning to get the biggest contract awarded to them and set the specifications. It's going to put a full integrated national index identification for every citizen of Australia. And there is the press releases and such forth. Now, this is getting very important now. Computer Power Group has what's called status software that they got from the UK, from the nuclear facilities there. It's an integration software, and its status, it's a text retrieval system, and they integrated it with artificial intelligence. So you can do free text entry for your searches, and then it goes through all the databases of scanned documents and also electronic documents and records, and it can intelligently link and find things at the press of a button. Hence the need for the Promis software by CIA, by William Casey, and the need for Computer Power Group, because they're doing the full development in Australia, paid by the Australian government, to build the biggest database and entries and intelligence system. And Wang Labs, Computer Power Group, Hadron and Simcom are all involved in developing CIA's software, called the SAFE software. Not only that, Rupert Murdoch and Computer Power were the biggest supplier of legal information systems for the governments, the federal attorney generals, state attorney generals, and courts. So this is when it comes into case management for law enforcement and courts and police. So what it does point out is that it is the biggest retrieval system, and it says here that it's been sold through Wang Labs USA as subsidiaries and such forth, integrated into government services. It establishes now, this is the first time, we actually now got Ted Prince, after doing this contract with Wang Labs and Computer Power Groups for the Department of Social Security for fraud detection, then heads up and is appointed as their president. So their relationship's really, really strong, and it's going to be based on the status IQ, which is the AI version of it, and Rupert Murdoch, Ted Prince are going to be opening all the doors with Computer Power Group, Roger Allen, into the US government's Secretary of States, Secretary of Treasury, and of course CIA, NSA, Defense. So Computer Group has got their status IQ and swift access text retrieval and storage system using artificial intelligence has been acquired by US State Department. The annual reports confirm US Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury were the biggest clients of Computer Power Group, particularly James Baker. It was integrated as the biggest retrieval system called STARS, which would link all intelligence and foreign correspondence for the Secretary of State to be integrated instantly. I believe that this is main core. It's main core for all correspondence, emails, faxes, documents, newspaper articles, anything that can be retrieved that's top secret. At one push, it finds it. And it's Computer Power Group that develops that software. Here is the press release of STARS. The IT from US Secretary and Treasury. It's installed now in Treasury. So they've done it in the State Department. They're now doing it across in Treasury as well. But it is with James Baker. Massive, and I'll bring the main parts about it. Ambassador for STARS. It's the Secretariat Tracking and Retrieval System called STARS. It's designed by Computer Power Group's database, Status IQ with artificial intelligence, and it's integrated and running on the next supercomputer of Wang Labs, but it also is available on IBM and VAX. It's used by White House. Again, it's built on Model 204 originally, and now they're upgrading it. So this goes all the way to the top. Computer Power Group gets its hands on the Promis tapes after Earl Bryan fails in his bid to acquire Inslaw Inc. during bankruptcy, i.e. wanting to buy them out and bankrupt them, with his company Hadron Inc. and the law enforcement software company owned by Paul Wormley. The address of Paul Wormley is at Hadron, and he's developing the CIA's case safe software with Hadron, with Wang Labs and Computer Power Group. The relationship is very strong. They're all after Inslaw's software, one way or the other. So the STARS software is the biggest contract all the way to the top. Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary, all correspondence scanned, indexed automatically with instant free text retrieval. Computer Power Group, Wang Labs. It also provides all the archivals, so you can do searches. So this is where the official records of State Department secrets, NSC, are going to be retrieved, archived. So let's go back to Ted Prince. Big press releases. He arrives in America. He's supported by Murdoch. Now make a note of this. Murdoch is also on the board of United Technologies Corp. Alexander Haig was the chairman of United Technologies Corp before he became Secretary of State. Roger Allen, press release, Ted Prince, Murdoch, CP, and they're opening the biggest contracts for text retrieval with Wang Labs, Data General Corp, and AT&T. And AT&T, we're also a partner of Inslaw and tried to acquire Inslaw's Promis software. Why that's important, my previous podcast is, and I'll show you that on the board of Citibank was Gerald Ford, former president, and C. Michael Armstrong, who was the chairman of AT&T, and he was a director of Johns Hopkins Medicine, who my company had legal actions and fraud investigation with the federal police. The chance of Gerald Ford offering to negotiate $100 million settlement for my companies in previous podcasts that I detail all that, and Michael Armstrong, the chairman of AT&T, a partner and involvement trying to acquire Inslaw, is too much of a coincidence that he's sitting on the board of Citibank. And Michael said that the Promis software originally was installed at Citibank for Earl Bryan and CIA to move the CIA's covert funds. On the board of Citibank with Michael Armstrong, who was the chairman of AT&T and director and chairman of the trustees of Johns Hopkins with Gerald Ford, was John Deutsch, former director of CIA. So there's their fanfare. It's leaders in Unix-based database management systems, Computer Power Group. So with Murdoch, Wang Labs, they're moving in, and all the way to the Secretaries of State and Secretary of Treasury. So that reconfirms, the big press release confirms that Ted Prince, who met with Bill Hamilton and with Roger Allen to become the distributor of Inslaw's Promis software, they needed it originally for the biggest fraud detection and integration database outside of the US done by Wang Labs with Computer Power Group. It's confirming here that the original strat plan was based on Model 204 database, and it was built on the success of their contracts for building the biggest networks and communication network with the United States Air Force. That's how StratPlan evolved. But more important, Wang Labs is also using it as a test site for building the biggest integration communications and telecommunications network to the standards in Brussels. And this is when you learn the truth of what it really was being used for and why the parties are all working together. This one is an article summarising the complexity across the National Computer Centre in Canberra, integrating all databases, identities of people for banking, social security, healthcare records, with Wang Labs and Computer Power Group Model 204. There it is, 204, and facilities, 180 offices, 70 million social security payments are being monitored and linked with the land titles so that they can confirm people are declaring their assets in order to qualify. It's for fraud detection. Company registry or bank accounts, transactions will be integrated. It is the biggest integration project. Just to let you know, all the legal courts systems used by courts, law enforcement, justice are also integrated together with Wang Labs using Computer Power's status retrieval, artificial intelligence. Computer Power Group, biggest area, and that confirms status originally came from the UK Atomic Energy Research Establishment at Harwell. You can see that it has synergy with Robert Maxwell's case, who's trying to sell Promis software to Los Alamos Research Centre for nuclear testing. Isn't it interesting that Computer Power Group's software originated from the UK's Atomic Energy Research Establishment, and Robert Maxwell turns up trying to sell Israel's software to the US? Interesting. I think you'll find that intelligence is all over this for the retrieval and tracking worldwide based on Model 204. Okay, I'll go through some of this stuff, but it just goes to show big press releases, Computer Power to spend $6 million to build the biggest database known to mankind in Australia with Wang Labs. Key parts to it is that also not only are they going to be integrating the Department of Social Security records, look at the right, top right up here. They're also going to be building an advanced online banking system, originally produced by Hogan Systems in Texas based on Model 204, which was chosen by the Department of Social Security. Fourth generation language called PC Focus. Now this part's very important, but it's banking, fraud detection and banking database. It's going to expand. In 2004, Michael said the second application, the enhanced Promis software, was for Swift banking. It was installed at Transaction Technologies Inc., a subsidiary of Citibank, for Dr. Earl Bryan, chairman of Hadron Inc., and CIA to move covert funds through international automatic clearinghouses. So Citibank, can you see the link? I'm exposing Promis. I've got a fraud case against the partners of Johns Hopkins Applied Physics with me, and there's a separate podcast on their links with the first application of Promis being used with Hadron to develop the Trident submarine fire control systems, command systems for tracking Soviet submarines. And Michael's telling me, just before the TV programs go to air, that it was installed at Citibank. And I've got Gerald Ford turning up, wanting to negotiate $100 million. He's on the board of Citibank with C. Michael Armstrong, chairman of AT&T, chairman of the Johns Hopkins trustees, who have relationships with Inslaw Inc. and Promis. So intelligence knew that I was helping Bill Hamilton the day I picked up the phone, and also my communications with Michael by letters, backwards and forwards to the prison. Here's a part that's very interesting. The author, I interviewed John Belton. He was assisting RCMP investigations of fraud and Promis software being sold by Dr. Earl Bryan to the Canadian government, particularly RCMP, CSE, which is the testimony of Michael Riconosciuto. And this is what he said to me. Whilst I was working at Nesbitt, I received a telephone call from Stanley Schumann, Managing Director of Allen & Co., providing personal reference for the credibility of Dr. Earl Bryan for the investments they were doing with Nesbitt, and he was chairman of Hadron Inc., Infotechnology Inc., Biotech, vouching that Earl Bryan is a good and honest man. Quote. Now, sadly, John Belton has passed away, but I have my recorded interviews with him, which I'll do in a separate podcast because it ties up with the RCMP going to do an investigation on Promis software. They visited Michael Riconosciuto in prison and immediately went to the daughter, Dee Ferdinand, who's the daughter of Albert V. Carone, the bagman for Nugenhan Bank, CIA, personal friends of William Casey and William Colby and Michael Hand, and also a made man within the Gambino Mafia in New York. I will do a whole podcast on that because I've got all the evidence of the links with Australia. But let's focus now back on this bit. Stanley Schumann, personal friend and vouching for Earl Bryan. Now that name was familiar with me. John Belton's evidence provided to Inslaw was about Inslaw's Promis software being sold by Earl Bryan across to RCMP, and confirms that Bill's legal case, Bill had received telephone calls, his daughter had received telephone calls from RCMP requesting, they're using his Promis software, and does he have a French version of it? John Belton, former stockbroker, Canadian Promis distribution, Earl Bryan. So he knew Earl Bryan definitively. I have also in his involvement with selling the Promis software to RCMP and through the Privy Council Canada and the intelligence security staff, particularly CSE, for their integrated system. So have a look at this. We've got Earl Bryan selling law enforcement software to the Canadians, and we've got Computer Power Group getting the Promis software and modifying it and selling the lean software to Australia, and also intimately involved in the biggest contracts that need the database integration capabilities of Promis for VAX computers, IBM computers, and particularly also for Wang Labs computers. Now this part's important. Here is a press release in 1988 when people talk about Earl Bryan with these companies, then it says here, on Wall Street, when the 46-year-old entrepreneur needs money, it appears all he has to do is call Allen & Co., the family investment partnership. This guy has a record of taking things that are sick and making them well, said Ned Pattinson, the firm's retired executive vice president of Allen & Co. But what I knew is that I had all of the annual reports of Computer Power Group, and Rupert Murdoch's company News Limited was the biggest shareholder. 50% was owned with Roger Allen. And have a look at this. Stanley Schumann, the man that's giving personal references and guarantees for Earl Bryan. He was the managing director of Allen & Co., who were the biggest investors in Murdoch's company as well. Two media barons. The themes coming through loud to me in my research. Why is there three barons of media all intimately wanting to get their hands on the Promis software? Earl Bryan, Robert Maxwell, and Rupert Murdoch. And there it is. When Hadron Inc. and Simcon Inc. were trying to acquire Inslaw's company to get control of the Promis software, they were being bankrolled by Stanley Schumann, Allen and Company. And he was already appointed at the same time onto News Limited, or News Corporation, in 1982. He's been sitting there. And he also later is appointed onto the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Body by President Clinton. I mean, this is intelligence all over it. He's also held the chairmanship of Public Policy Science and Public Affairs at Duke University, where Earl Bryan was educated, and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. This has got intelligence written all over it. Earl Bryan, Stanley Schumann, and Rupert Murdoch, and Roger Allen with Computer Power Group. Let's go back. In 1982, Rupert Murdoch was almost facing bankruptcy when he's introduced to Reagan, President Reagan, by Roy Cohn. An interesting personality given the new movie, Where's My Roy Cohn? And his links with representing the mafia. He's introduced to President Reagan, becomes an American citizen. This is Rupert Murdoch. Permission to buy out US media empires. And at the same time is introduced with Charles Wick and Walter Remand and William Casey to bankroll Project Democracy, which is a front foundation for Iran-Contra and CIA's propaganda program. After Charles Wick leaves White House, he's also appointed as a director on News Limited with Stanley Schumann. So we are looking at an intelligence layer of funding by Murdoch, bankrolling CIA's Project Democracy and propaganda, and has the Promis software. But the Iran-Contra overlay is what Danny CASOLARO was investigating, Promis software being used to money launder the drugs for Noriega and BCCI, through BCCI, SWIFT accounts, and transactions that he was getting from Alan Standorf and IRS as his evidence. So now let me prove to you this. The founder of Wang Labs, Ang Wang, is dealing with Roger Allen. The top R&D director who personally reports to the founder of Wang Labs is flying backwards and forwards to Australia to help Roger Allen and Ted Prince develop the whole StratPlan software for the integration of the biggest database and telecommunications system with banking, fraud detection. Wang Labs is also working with Earl Bryan's Hadron Inc. and Simcom Inc. with Paul Wormley to develop CIA's SAFE software for NSA, DIA and CIA, integration of all intelligence information for embassies and US State Department. Computer Power Group, biggest client is the US State Department and Treasury for all their retrieval software. Computer Power Group and Hadron both represent all of the training of intelligence agents in CIA, NSA, DIA, and Justice, and FBI, AFP in Australia, for using the Wang Alliance software systems and terminals for integration of CIA SAFE. And the common investor to both of them is Stanley Schumann, on the board in 1982, and he's bankrolling and assisting Earl Bryan in his first attempt to get and acquire Inslaw Inc. And alternatively, it turns out these guys fly across. Roger Allen, Ted Prince decide to fly across and approach Bill Hamilton directly and then get their hands on the Cobalt tapes from day one. They are all contracted to the intelligence, NSA, CIA, DIA for the development of all of the integrated safe intelligence database retrieval systems and the safe Swift banking software for CIA and NSA. Let me prove it to you. Here's the resume of Charlie Cross, principal software engineer. He developed and founded Wang's retail banking strategy products, developed the Swift automated financial environment on Swift 1 and 2 in Virginia and also Belgium. Became the first, Wang Labs became the first non-Swift vendor with Swift 2 certification. So now CIA, with their contracts with Computer Power, Wang Labs and Hadron, have now infiltrated the Swift network with NSA, CIA, DIA, with the application layers that are going to be put in for standards to be distributed worldwide. But this part's the part that's really great. He was invited to work personally with Anne Wong, the founder of Wang Labs, to set up R&D, and it was called VS Shark Financial Systems, or Wang Labs Financial Information Systems. He developed it throughout 85 and 1990 to integrate it into not only Swift banking, but also into the stock markets and brokerage houses. And of course, Hadron was providing terminals as well into the stock market houses in New York, Chicago and Canada, and also in London. Now this part's really incredible. It confirms that he served as the R&D leader and team for Strat Plan with the Australian government with Roger Allen and Ted Prince. So now you've got your direct link of these guys. And then he also, let's go back in time, he developed remote WAGNet and the Wang Professional Image Computer, which then does the scanning, which was part of CIA's and Navy retrieval systems. You've got to understand this, it is with the Navy. And then develops Wang's word processing and mini computer systems and applications. But this one's the key. He worked for a company called RF Cross Associates originally before he gets into Wang Labs. He established the Word Processing Surface Bureau and managed all related activities and developed extensive case tracking system for the Naval Discharge Review Board. And this is the beginning and genesis of Insular software. This is the part that now you're going to see how far they went. Wang caters for financial systems. They're integrated into all banking. Now this part, it's got Sharks, executive services, promoting them and installed in the large training institutions. Okay, it's for stock markets and financial services, office automation. It's a partnership. Then there was the crisis, Wall Street, the crash of 1987. I know it well. I had a research company about to get investments for patents that I had. The computer-driven trading strategies such as program trading and portfolio insurance were blamed for causing market volatility that sent prices into a free fall. It was automation that helped save the securities industry survive. The CEO of Wang Financial Information Services, which provides Shark, an online stock quote and trading service, anyone using that didn't fall. So it's high-level intelligence to pick trends up using AI, but it's going to be integrated into the SWIFT banking system. Now, here's pictures. Remember, Rupert Murdoch Company with Wang and Hadron and Simcom developing all of NSA, CIA's intelligence database retrieval systems, has got Data General, Wang Labs, for their status information retrieval systems. And turns out this part's going to be important. It turns out that they're developing the safe SWIFT automated financial environment, the SWIFT banking network, safe for SWIFT 1 and SWIFT 2, installed on the network, the SWIFT network in Belgium, and also the SWIFT network in Virginia, CIA territory. So, reconfirming, worldwide integrated banking applications, Computer Power Group and Wang Labs for Treasury, SWIFT interface called SAFE. What I like is it's using Computron's accounting packages. This was LaRouche's foundation that was destroyed by Roy Frankhauser and CIA, who was exposing that CIA was money laundering drugs. This part's, I'll do a separate as a podcast, but that part is really important. So let's summarize it. Here we go. 10th of June, July 1989, Shark Expo merges Wang data with LMT software. So it's been integrated across with all information systems with Swift banking using Wang's Shark software application layers. It's a joint venture between Computer Power Group, Wang, and Hadron on a large scale for CIA, NSA, and DIA. Let me prove it. Info Technology purchased Shark from Wang Labs, 1990. Have a look at that. They've been developing all the CIA SAFE software for SWIFT, the SAFE software for CIA, for intelligence integration across all intelligence agencies, CIA, NSA, and DIA, for US Secretary of State with NSC. And surprise, surprise, Earl Bryan rolls up and acquires it from Wang Labs, the key programmer who set it up, who was working with Computer Power, Ted Prince, Roger Allen, originally to set up the Strat Plan, biggest network for fraud detection. And there is a proof. Shark Information Services, 1985, dissolved in 1997. It was originally Wang's Financial Information Services Corporation, and it was owned now by Dr. Earl Bryan. There's the legal proof. Computer Power Group, Wang Lab, and Hadron Inc. were always working with CIA, NSA, DIA to develop their safe intelligence integrated database system for William Casey and the safe SWIFT banking network for CIA to move covert and NSA to move their covert funds internationally through the banks and clearinghouses, just as Michael had testified. And it was installed at all banks, Citibank, World Bank, IMF, and All Banks Australia. And it was put into FinCEN, the fox looking after the chicken coop. It's their detection for money laundering so that they can clear their covert funds without it being detected. And it was put into Austrac, and it was put into the FinCEN equivalent in Canada and the UK. So there's the proof that all roads for the Promis software lead to Wang Labs, Computer Power Group, Hadron, with the media barons Earl Bryan and Rupert Murdoch. I'm going to go one step further. That confirms the application for Swift Banking testified by Michael in his interviews with me and also in his court testimonies in 1991. The Lean software was developed by Computer Power Group. It was designed with the Intergraph VAX computers and VAX computers and IBM computers and Amdahl computers with Wang Labs and also Hadron and Computer Power Group. It was going to set up the first rival card. This is the press release of fear that triggered a full parliamentary inquiry. Michael had already been on TV with Bill Hamilton in Current Affairs, exposing that the Promis software had been sold to ASIO, the Australian government, by Earl Bryan. Well, it turns out it was Earl Bryan and Rupert Murdoch that sold it and developed it. Here is the areas of integration. It was put into the Federal Police, the Tax Office, Department of Social Security, that was the strat plan, Department of Defence, Department of Employment, Education and Training, Customs, Public Prosecutions, National Crime Authority and the Attorney General's Department, and the Australian Bureau of Criminal Intelligence. The author of the pilot trial with Computer Power Group is Peter Roberts, the Attorney General. He was the Assistant Secretary to the Federal Attorney General. The purpose of the lean, he wrote a paper on the pilot trial that Computer Power Group did. It was the lean information technology, and it was going to be central computer facilities operated by the Attorney General's Department in Australia. It was for taking data from suppliers without modification, hence the need for Promis, that it can interface all databases across all departments, vendors, no matter what, provide a gateway access terminals in user agencies, and a capacity to use sophisticated search investigation techniques across the available databases. It's using AI, Australian Artificial Intelligence. Here is confirmation of all of the areas: Department of Defence, Federal Police, Department of Social Security, which is the contract that Roger Allen, Ted Prince and Wang Labs were working on whilst developing CIA's SAFE software. It was going to use intelligence, detect, investigations, prosecutions. This is the purpose of LEAN, the law enforcement activity path for the software, but it was a law enforcement access network. And that's Michael's testimony in court and given to me. I did not know about Michael's testimony in 1981. I only found out when I interviewed him in 2004, and he arranged for me to get the copies of the official transcripts. I went through them, and there it was in black and white. That Promis software he modified was renamed the Lean software and sold to the Australian government, are his words in court. And so, here you go. It turns out that the Lean software was in the pilots developed, integrated and done with DSS, which is StratPlan, Wang Labs, Computer Power Group. Confirmation that it was also integrated at AUSTRAC and state police forces for tracking fraud. That's the same as FinCEN in the USA. The Lean facility, okay, was going to integrate banks and land titles. Isn't that nice? The original application of Promis for Ireland was for tracking land titles, and we've got the Promis software installed in Northern Territory with Computer Power Group with the police and justice, and Computer Power is developing the integrated justice systems and the land title database systems. It also confirms that the Australian Federal Police participated in this law enforcement network with Computer Power Group. So I know for a fact that AFP has what they call their Promis software, and it's a derivative of Inslaw's Promis software from Northern Territory, from the same police officer who worked on it with Computer Power Group. The lean pilot ended mid-1991. It became a permanent facility at Austrac in October 91. And now the key is this. I interviewed the author of that report, Peter Roberts. He was at a university, Australian Graduate School of Policing and Security. He had served as the Assistant Secretary of the Federal Attorney General, and he was a National Crime Authority. He was responsible for the lean pilot trial. I asked him, was Computer Power Group the company that developed the lean software? I already knew it was because I got the resume of Computer Power Group's programmer confirming he was leading the initiative in Canberra. And he says on the record, during the pilot trial of the lean software with the Federal Attorney General, the Computer Power Group demonstrated their lean software that was already installed at Austrac. And there you have it. Michael said the Promis software was renamed the lean software and sold to the Australian government. And this now confirms everything about the trail of Computer Power Group with Wang Labs and Hadron Inc. and Simcom Inc. developing all of CIA's safe software for intelligence databases and also the SWIFT network. Austrac is like FinCEN. There's the proof. I'm going to go one step further. Here's the proof for the safe software with Computer Power, Hadron, Simcom and Wang. This is the official records I've uncovered through FOI, all the records of the safe software. And here's your legal proof. Goes back to 1982-83. The contracts were given to Hadron. SAFE is called the Secure Analyst File Environment Project. It's available for all CIA agents working at all embassies worldwide and also throughout US Secretary State Department. It comprises of application, hardware, system software, database, user interface, distributed processing capability, safe terminal management software. So that's what SAFE is. We've got Hadron contracted. It confirms there's CIA Safe A, B, C. I've followed all of those. It involved TRW. TRW, of course, was involved with the Strat Plan software with Wang Lab and Computer Power, and it runs the Echelon network at Pine Gap. More information on shops. Hadron contracted to train all of CIA operatives on the use of SAFE worldwide. It talks about the SAFE software being integrated with DIA, Defence Intelligence Agency. It's a joint project with NSA. And now we've got all the hardware and terminals are all based on Tempest with Wang Labs Alliance software and computer systems. Wang Lab Alliance is in ASIO since 1979 with VAX computers, but it's also throughout all White House, US State Department and Treasury. It's the only way that you can be accessing the databases because it's all approved as NSA approved, Tempest free, and it became the standard with Wang. So Wang's involved with the SAFE project. They also have Wang computers and the DEC VAX computers, 750 at the time, integrated office automation for service back in 85. It's integrated command control information systems for intelligence, and here's the one for computer power group. It's based on Status. Their artificial intelligence text retrieval system is used with Wang Labs and Hadron. And more important, TRW, Hadron, more links going all the way up to, from 1982, Wang Labs. Now this is the big crunch one. Here's SimCom. SimCom personnel. They do all the training for the US State Department and CIA, domestically and overseas, using the Wang systems. So they're the accredited trainer for CIA and state embassies for all of the Wang safe software. It even provided, as part of recommendations for their original contracts in 1982, Paul Wormley in the archive. Now, Paul Wormley was based at Hadron and involved with SimCom, with Earl Brown, when they tried to acquire Inslaw back in 82. Confirming categorically databases CIA safe, inquire, but it's using the status retrieval software. Contracts for Hadron all over the place. So support for analyst file environment. It's the most secure integrated database. William Casey mandated with Edwin Meese that all intelligence databases had to be integrated from one system, and that's what they awarded to Hadron, Wang Labs and Computer Power Group, using the status software retrieval systems, free text integration. It was put on Wang, DG, Data General, all throughout. And then the big Intergraph fax computers appear. As Michael said, the Intergraph systems can do integrated GIS with information for graphical information systems, and that's when they're doing the tracking of drugs and narcotics operations. And there it is, confirmed. The VAX 11785, specially designed VMS, and that's what Michael said was the real architecture that Echelon wanted to use. And the Intergraph systems were integrated into Promis in Northern Territory with Computer Power Group. There's confirmation. The official director biography says that the first mini computers that were installed in ASIO in Australia were based on the Wang computer terminals and Wang database systems, and then in 1986 ASIO installed the DEC VAX clusters for their Oasis office automation system. And that confirms the testimony and telephone call Bill Hamilton received from a Mr. Nick Rose from ACES, who was upset that he has witnessed that CIA has sold Inslaw's bootleg Promis software to ASIO, and it was part of the Oasis system using DEC VAX clusters. So, here is the evidence. Lean software sold to Australian government, and the links all the way back to CIA, Secretaries of State, Alexander Haig, James Baker, Treasury, James Baker, all the way with CIA, NSA, DIA. Just to remind you, it all started in Parliament. No one knew about the Promis software until Current Affair had interviewed Bill Hamilton, and also in 92, Bill Hamilton, Michael Riconosciuto and Elliot Richardson, the evidence that CIA stole the Promis software and sold it to the Australian government and ASIO. That's the first time that you'll find any record about the Promis software being in Australia and linked with Computer Power Group and Inslaw. It's the only record I can find of Inslaw is in the Hansard when the question was asked following the Current Affair program. You will not find any reference to Inslaw other than this statement. Worldwide, let's keep going. Could there be even more independent verification? Well, yes. It turns out ComTouch announces the sale of consumer messaging unit to Computer Power Software Group in California in 2001. It's an Israeli company. I have all of the press releases and records of this. And this is it. Who's on the board? Caroline Chin, former Secretary, U.S. Department of Health and Education, HUD, White House. She worked for AT&T, Citibank, Citicorp. That's very interesting, where the Promis software was installed. She also served as Vice President at IBM. Reuters America. Everywhere that Promis has been. Now remember, this is very important. This is the trail we've gone through. Okay. I've got an inquiry. I'm being threatened by Rupert Murdoch's company, Roger Allen's company, and I call Bill for the first time. Then I launch a police investigation. I contact Michael in 2004. President Ford mysteriously appears from the board of Citibank to negotiate $100 million, and C. Michael Armstrong's on the board with him, and so is John Deutsch, director of CIA. TV program, Robert Booth Nichols comes out and threatens me. Then I hear from Bill that Paul Wolfowitz is upset about my research into Promis, because I also uncovered the World Bank definitive links with Promis, which I'll do in another podcast. Let's go forward a little bit. Who owns ComTouch? Oh, Isabel Maxwell. She renamed Information on Demand, Research on Demand. It was called Information on Demand. She's the owner. What's the chance that ComTouch, Isabel Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, is selling her company to Computer Power Group? Let's have a look. Christine Maxwell was the founder of Information on Demand with Isabel. It was called Information on Demand. They were also directors of Pergamon Press with Robert Maxwell. It turns out that her company today is being used. This is Isabel. Okay? This is Christine Maxwell, sorry. And Isabel owns this one. So Isabel Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, is selling her software company from Israel to Computer Power Group. Her sister Christine Maxwell was a director of Information on Demand with her. She sold her software to FBI. Do you see the faces that are in the news? Their software is being used by FBI as one of the best search engines for counterterrorism worldwide. But do you remember this? The FBI investigation into Information on Demand, owned by Isabel and Christine Maxwell, with Robert Maxwell, trying to sell Promis software to Los Alamos Nuclear Research Center. Make a note of this. B1 classification is executive order by the President. It's all over Michael's records and Danny CASOLARO records. Pergamon Press, Information on Demand, getting access to all the legal databases, criminal, and also Congress records. Isn't there a common theme here? Robert Maxwell's infiltrating the Congress records and correspondence, computer systems that Hadron has installed, and Roger Allen and Rupert Murdoch have developed the complete federal parliamentary records for the members of parliament and senators. B1 classifications all blacked out. You can only do, that's presidential executive level. And there it is. It's the Sandia National Laboratories, Robert Maxwell, Pergamon International trying to sell their Promis software. B1 and B3, NSA. B3 is NSA. All over Michael's records as well. B1, B3. So here we have a theme. Robert Maxwell, known to be selling Promis software to Soviet Union and Eastern blocs, and also involved in Australia. The two daughters are involved, and then they, out of the blue, sell their biggest email system in the world to computer power group directors. This is the part that I will do a separate podcast on, but I'll show you how far Roger Allen goes. See, Robert Maxwell was the owner of De La Rue through Bishopgate Investments with Cytex. You must understand that they manufacture the money, the paper, and the credit card systems being used by the banks, passports, and identification. He was the largest shareholder with Cytex. And Cytex was the company distributing the Promis software with Robert Maxwell. It turns out that his company had a partnership with Philips to develop the microchip smart cards and software for the whole banking industry throughout Europe and UK. It produces all of the passports, IDs, but we're moving from paper money to electronic money. This is now automated bank and SWIFT validation and certification and encryption, which is what my company was doing with United Nations SEAL program that was destroyed. A separate podcast, but let me show you. It turns out that a deal is done for a joint venture because they had with Philips to make the smart cards. This part is now crucial. Robert Maxwell owned that company, had the largest shares, and they were moving into the electronic encryption and smart cards for validation of transactions, identify users and authorize transfers of funds, not using paper but using electronic transfers in the banking industry. And so it turns out De La Rue and Philips produce one of the best smart cards and electronic systems. And guess what? It's going to be used for standardization and authentication of all passports, money, and electronic smart cards. And guess who buys it? Roger Allen. They bought all of the Philips software and encryption devices developed by the company owned by Robert Maxwell and started a company called Authentate. I have a whole podcast I'm doing on this because they're the group that destroyed my encryption companies with United Nations SEAL program. I have the legal evidence now. So not only was he destroying me with government, but they wanted to get and monopolize all of the encryption technologies for the banking industries. That was done with Robert Maxwell's company. So we've got Computer Power Group buying Isabel Maxwell's emails companies, and now he's buying all the technologies. He sold his company, Authenticate, to Active Card, which provides all military encryption and identification across all facilities in US in defence, nuclear, and CIA, NSA, DIA. And guess who gets appointed on the board? He sells his company, and the company that Roger Allen negotiated personally with was Active Card, appointed the former Deputy Director of CIA in 2003, who was in that position, National Security of NSA, Mr. Cromwell. 2004, they appoint the Deputy Director of NSA. What is fantastic here is those two Deputy Directors were in office when Danny was investigating the Promis software. Danny had all the evidence. He was following Earl Bryan, BCCI, Promis. And these are the guys who Roger Allen is going to be selling all of his technology that he got, which was put together with Robert Maxwell's company. So you can see the integration is overwhelming. Promis, first attempt was for Earl Bryan with Allen & Co. with Stanley Schumann to acquire Inslaw and couldn't succeed. He's on the board of Rupert Murdoch's company, so Roger Allen and Ted Prince fly across to Boston and secure the COBOL tapes of the Promis software in Australia. They were all working with NSA, CIA, DIA, all of the integrated databases for intelligence and for Swift banking. So there's the journey and evidence that I've uncovered. As I said, 21 years. The best physicists and minds say that when you look at an octopus, it disguises itself when it knows it's been observed. But when you collapse down the probability function in 3D, and let's make it 4D, that it's including time over 21 years, you can't throw a dice to get all the ducks lining up. This is the integration of octopus to the top. 3 media barons, echelon, infiltration and partnership with the intelligence agencies to control the banking and intelligence of foreign governments and banks internationally. I dedicate it to the memory of Danny CASOLARO. He was brilliant. He had the evidence. He didn't commit suicide.